What did you find down there in Georgia?
Well, the great pleasure and privilege of actually going and asking voters in their own hometowns what they want is my favorite part of the job. And so we talked in this trip to black voters from all different backgrounds across the state of Georgia, from rural Georgia in the south to Atlanta and suburban Atlanta. And what we found overall is that there's a lot of anger, not only toward Trump and the Republicans, but toward the Democratic establishment and leadership as well. And a lot of that is driven by concerns not just about affordability writ large, but the idea that corporate interests have really taken over politics and taken over both political parties. From the White House to the Democratic Party, they want corporate money out of politics, and they want a fighter in office who's going to speak to their economic, travails, but also just going to bring back hope and joy to politics. And so I was most stunned to hear even older black Democrats who are not necessarily super progressive, really open to, interested in, brought up themselves, folks like Zohran Mamdani in the same sentence as folks like Jon Ossoff. So what they see that from their point of view, this is about who's going to fight for them, who's going to fight for multiracial democracy, who's going to fight to protect civil rights, and also to help make sure that they and their children can live a decent middle-class life in this country, and that they're not captured by corporate interests.
So let's listen to some of your conversation, this among Democratic voters who say their votes should not be taken for granted.
What do you think the Democratic Party thinks of you?
I think that the progressives of the Democratic Party specifically, I think they see me as a person who is capable of inspiring change within my community. But I would say for a lot of the more the older members of the Democratic Party feels like I'm just another number to get them a vote.
Sounds like generational change is something people are looking for.
Oh, I mean, again, even older voters said to me, they said, look, I wish the Democrats would focus on the economy more, but we are just missing some young blood.
Yeah.
What happened? Something went wrong. And so again, though, there's a sense that there's a group of kind of, standbys, people who've been there too long, who have been captured by interests and are no longer representing the people. And some of that has to do with age and generational change. Some of that has to do with policy. But they are looking for new ideas and new people to represent them.
There's been so much talk about this democratic socialist movement that spans from New York City, but now to Michigan, and then a couple of nights ago in the state of Florida, where Angie Nixon, who we had on the show yesterday, won a double-digit victory over Alexander Vindman. So you talked to some Georgians about how they feel about that movement within the party.
Socialists, the word is like it's like a bad word.
To a lot of people, yeah.
To a lot of people. But they have some good points. I mean, there's some things that really take care of, some countries that really do have the socialist perspective. They really took care of their citizens.
So the word democratic socialism, the phrase, doesn't scare you?
Doesn't scare me.
What are some of the ideas that you hear from folks like AOC, for example, or Bernie, that you like?
That I like, that we need to do this healthcare piece.
Medicare for all.
Medicare for all. Yes, for all. If you're a citizen, you're born and raised, you should at least be able to go and say, I can get my teeth pulled.
So, Mara, obviously we have seen every race is different, every candidate is different, every district is different, whether or not sort of a, quote, socialist ideas play or not. But here, whether the label is socialism or not, are you seeing a real energy there about some of these more sort of progressive concepts, or just sort of like, hey, there are a means to an end. We just need to shake things up?
Absolutely. And I think we should really be careful about how radical some of these ideas are. I mean, some of the DSA platform is super radical. Abolishing prisons is not what is motivating these voters I talk to. But other parts of it, Medicare for all, for instance, the idea that every American should have health care, the idea that people should be treated the same at the voting booth, or, if they're going to go into a courtroom, that they shouldn't have special privileges because of who their daddy is. I mean, these are not radical concepts, Also, I think there is a laziness about the way we think about black voters in particular, who are at the heart of the Democratic Party. And of course, the Democrats have decided that South Carolina is going to be the first state for 2028 in the primary. So there's going to be a lot of attention on black voters, and they are not a single block. And in many cases, especially because of the suffering in the black community right now, just like many Americans are suffering, there is an openness to try something new. And there's a hunger for that. So I think, the DSA can also, in some ways, be thought of as just a political strategy. It's a different way to organize people. But when you go to places like Georgia, and even when you go to Michigan, it's not that foreign because this is a union state. We're talking about an electorate that is ready to try something new and also really frustrated and very disappointed and has been let down by the Democratic leadership. And I just think, Jeffries, Leader Jeffries, after the win by the DSA candidates in New York, said something kind of glib as the effect of, oh, well, this was the most gentrified district in America. Well, is Jacksonville, Florida, the most gentrified district or area in America? Is Albany, Georgia, the most gentrified? No, this is coming from the base. This is not coming from, some Nepo babies who are hanging out in the commie corridor of Brooklyn.
And we had to go back to our interview with Angie Nixon yesterday, nuance in she doesn't want to abolish prison. She said, I don't want to defund the police. She does agree that we should not give aid of any kind to Israel, which is going to be difficult to defend in the state of Florida, running statewide. But there is this broad brush, and I think a lot of us at this table disagree with the more extreme elements of it. But the economic message that candidates like Angie Nixon are leaning into seems to be breaking through.
The economic message, but also the accountability portion of this, because you can talk all day about broad concepts like affordability, but we have to acknowledge exactly what Joe was talking about a moment ago, which is there are people who are stealing from the American people. And so when they're not held accountable, what kind of message does that send? We talk so much about the erosion of trust in democratic institutions. But when I went to Georgia and talked to people, what really kind of stuck with me is this idea that because Donald Trump himself, the most powerful man in the land, was not held accountable and those around him were not held accountable, that is probably the biggest driver of the lack of trust at this point among voters, because they're saying, well, what hope is there for me, for the little guy, for a small business owner, for someone just starting out out of college? People want a sense of fairness. And if the Democratic Party is not going to organize itself in terms of just the veterans in that party and the leadership, there's not a lot of faith that they are willing to stand up and fight for the country and the vision of the country that millions of Americans want. So people are looking for an alternative. And right now that's coming from the left. It doesn't have to, by the way.
Well, that frustration drove one of the Georgians you spoke to vote for President Trump. Explains why here.
There was a point that I just voted straight Democrat. Now I'm at the point that I'm actually taking the time to look at each candidate, to actually see the ballot before I go to the voting booth to know what I'm doing. The first time I voted for Obama, I thought it was going to make a difference. And the first time I voted for Donald Trump, I thought it was going to make a difference.
Let me ask, your vote for Donald Trump both times, was that a vote that was cast in the hopes that Donald Trump could maybe make a change or deliver something different? Or was that a protest vote against the Democratic Party?
Probably more protest.
It sounds like the Democratic Party has let you down.
I think government has let me down.
Mm-hmm. And Mark Leibovich, that's the key line right there. It doesn't matter party anymore, right? We've been let down. My life is too expensive. It's too difficult. Rich people are getting richer. I can't get anywhere. I can't afford to buy a house. All the things we talk about every day on this show. So if you are the DNC right now watching Mara's interviews in the state of Georgia, you're thinking what?
Well, I certainly would pay attention to, all this DSA stuff and the candidates who are perceived, or many people would perceive to be too left of center to be viable for Democrats. Their success is telling. It's obviously transformed the Democratic Party. I guess what we're going to learn is how that's going to play out in general election settings, particularly in places like Michigan. But I also think, look, as far as messaging goes, core economic messages, especially around things like health care, do seem to be driving a lot of these views. I mean, yes, there is this blanket frustration with government. I think both parties, there's obviously more of it centered probably on the Republicans now that they're in power. But I do think that there is a pretty strong delineation between things like Medicare for all, perhaps, certainly health care, some, more economically based things, and the kind of blanket fear and unpopularity around things like abolishing prisons, defund the police, and so forth. So I do think Democrats have a real challenge to try to parse the message a little bit to really focus it on things that their voters and that swing voters potentially care a lot more about, which I think are economic messages. And corruption is related to that, obviously.
Absolutely. Staff writer for The Atlantic, Mark Leibovich. Lebo, thanks as always. Opinion writer at The New York Times, Mara Gay, bringing those incredible interviews. Mara, thanks so much for your reporting.